Okay, let's move on to the second talk of the day. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Daniel Skibra from the University of Constance. His talk is titled Desired Contents and Temporal Adverbs.
Great. So thanks a lot for having me. First thing I wanted to say is I've got two screens here, so I'm going to be, and right now both of them are showing my slides, so I'll be turning my head quite a bit, but so don't mind if you see a lot of my profile. Second of all, thanks to David and Raphael for having me. I'm actually fairly excited. I'm quite excited to be here and to present this material to precisely this crowd. A couple of weeks before I received the invitation, I was actually I was working on this stuff, and I was talking to Michael Glansberg about this stuff that I was kind of going over in this paper, and he was like, "You should really talk to David about this." And I was like, "All right, well, I don't know when I'm going to see David." and then I got the invitation, and then I saw who else is presenting, and I was like, "All right, well, this is great because these people will all tell me if this is all nonsense." So let me go ahead and get started. Right, so here's the roadmap for today's talk. I'm going to introduce a thesis. The thesis is about attitude content. In particular, it's about desire content. The thesis I'm calling Desire Temporalism. Might be pretty clear for those of you who know a little bit about this, what the view is going to mean. Then I'm actually going to describe a challenge to desire temporalism. It's something that once I started kind of plumping for this view, people were, this comes up every now and again. And so I thought, let me really think about this challenge in a little bit more detail. I'm going to propose a solution. And briefly now I can say that the solution is going to involve taking adverbs as something like circumstance shifters. You see something like this in the work, not exactly, but something similar in the work of François Recanati. I'm actually going to describe an implementation of this from, not from Recanati, but from someone else. And then I'm going to implement the proposal in a little bit more detail, but with a little bit of a twist. So far, this is all a little bit vague, but we'll get into the details as we progress. So the thesis that I'm calling Desire Temporalism is really simply just the view that desire content is temporal. Now, what does that mean? Well, we saw something similar in Peter's talk the other day in this debate between the tensors and the detensors. There's this distinction between temporalism and eternalism, specifically with regarding the content. And I guess the detensors would correspond to the eternalists, and the tensors would correspond to the temporalists. What I'm kind of taking it to mean is something along the following lines. Temporal contents are contents that don't specify a time indication. So they require the provision of a time relative to which the content can be evaluated. So if you don't provide a time, then you don't get an evaluation. This contrasts with eternal contents, which does include a time indication, and famously, Frege is an example of somebody that's a famous eternalist here. And one of the hallmarks of eternal contents is that they don't change truth value over time. So temporalism was actually a pretty popular view in the history of philosophy. I think there's some evidence, quite a bit of evidence, that Aristotle held something like temporalism. The Stoics and a bunch of folks into the Middle Ages were temporalists. The view really fell out of favor, in the 20th century, and eternalism is kind of, maybe you might think of it now as the standard view. Sociologically speaking, this might very well just be the influence of Frege. And it might have also been the fact that there are a number of arguments advanced over the course of basically the entire 20th century, from folks like, I think like G.E. Moore, all the way up to in the 80s, people like Mark Richard, all arguing for eternalism. Now, desire temporalism is a little bit of a stronger claim than standard temporalism, because standard temporalism basically just says that there are temporal contents, or at least this is the way most temporalists will present the view, especially most contemporary temporalists. So it's an existential claim, so it's entirely consistent with temporalism. They will say that some content includes a time indication and some doesn't. Desire temporalism is stronger in the following sense. It says that desires don't provide a time indication, full stop. That's just not what desires do. This is a universal claim, but it only pertains to desires, right? It's entirely consistent with what I'm calling desire temporalism for it to be the case, for example, that, for all we know, maybe beliefs have eternal content. But when it comes to desires are temporal. In a way, this is, maybe I make the comparison to what Peter discussed in his talk. In a way, this is maybe a little bit more of a wimpy view than what Peter was talking about, because Peter was talking about this kind of, ubiquitous perspectival content. And sometimes temporal content, at least in the belief realm, is perspectival with respect to, the local now of the belief. And I'm saying this is a little bit of a wimpier view because it's only with respect to desire that I'm making a claim like this, but also that I think it's retains kind of a notion of content, and also that I don't necessarily think that it when it comes to desire, it necessarily has something to do with indexicality. So anyway, that's the view. But why think this? Why think that desires are temporal in this strong kind of sense? I'm not going to try and convince you of this claim entirely, but I'll go through some reasons for why you might think that this is the case. One thing that we can say is that desire contents are what we might call satisfaction variable. This is a kind of a symptom of their being temporal. And we can see this if we compare them to beliefs. Consider my belief that it's cloudy. Here's a picture on the slide of a very cloudy Lake Constance. Suppose that the belief is true, right? It's fairly easy to construe this belief in eternal terms, right? Such that the content is something like this. The time of my tokening of the belief, let's just call this time t, becomes part of the content, right? So when I have this belief, it's just that it is cloudy at t. And then we can, argue whether or not it's the case that beliefs are eternal or temporal, right? There's, we can have arguments about them, right? It's a coherent question to ask whether this is in fact what winds up happening, whether the time of the tokening of the belief becomes part of the content. But when we turn to desires, there's really not much plausibility to treat them the same way, right? So suppose I have a desire, and I have the desire to listen to David Bowie's Diamond Dogs album. So let's say that the content here is that I listen to Diamond Dogs. If I can draw a quick connection to Bridget's talk, I'll just say that so Diamond Dogs is the name of the album, but there's a song, and the B-side to Diamond Dogs is a Bowie song by the name of Holy Holy, which might actually be better than the song Diamond Dogs, even though it's not nearly as well known. So that's might be my connection here to another talk that happened yesterday. So anyway, I have this desire. I want to listen to Diamond Dogs. Now, with desires, we don't evaluate desire content as true or false. People have said, pointed out, but rather as satisfied or unsatisfied. But that's not really a big deal because it's just a different kind. It's just semantic evaluation of the content, and it's really more or less the same thing as true or false modulo direction of fit, right? And so this is said by folks like Searle, Platts, and Smith. But it's really implausible to construe this content eternally. Why? Well, because it's pretty clear. You know, at first my desire is unsatisfied. I do some stuff. I undertake certain actions, and then my desire is satisfied. Right? There's really no temptation to say that there's anything eternal about this content. Right? I'll come back to this point a little bit later. There's another reason here, which I won't go over in terribly much detail. I'll just call it here the modified Richard argument. Basically, Mark Richard published some papers in the early 80s, which argue that look, we can make anaphoric reference to things like contents, belief contents. And when we do that, when we reason about them or we engage in inferences about them, they really, really seem eternal. And if you reason with them in a way that construes them as temporal, then the inferences sound terrible. It's almost like we're attributing some irrationality to the ascribees of the belief. I won't go through these in much detail. It doesn't really matter so much for our purposes. It's just that I have, I kind of got worked up about this because it turns out that if you run the argument, this is a very, very influential. You know, this was treated as kind of settling the debate. But if you run the arguments with desire ascriptions, then you get the opposite conclusion, right? The inferences, which are so bad with belief ascription, are fine with desire ascriptions. There's still a lot more to say about that, so I won't worry about it too much here. The final thing that I'll say, I actually find really interesting because it's something that was said in a kind of a more minor paper by Dennis Stamp. And I think he's getting at something really important, and I'm not even certain that Stamp is meant to be getting at this, or maybe even is aware that he's getting at this. But I think this is a worthwhile quote to read in its entirety. Stamp says, suppose we have a tennis match set for tomorrow. I want to win, and I think I will. These states of mind have the same content, my winning the match. But there is a difference. If my belief that I will win is going to turn out to have been true, then it will have been true. True, that is, even now before the first point is played. My belief that I will win, if it should be true, will not come to be true when I win. My desire to win, however, if it is to be satisfied, will come to be satisfied only when I win. That is, only at match point. Only my having won will satisfy that desire. So even if I will win, my desire to win is not now satisfied, but my belief that I will win is true now if I am going to win, and my having won won't make it true. Won't make it true, that is, that I will win. Okay, sorry, that is a mouthful. This is what I take to be the most important of the sentences in this bit. My desire to win, however, if it is to be satisfied, will come to be satisfied only when I win. Right, so this kind of harks back to an earlier point that I made. I think makes it in even stronger terms, right? This pertains to the satisfaction variability of desires. But it seems to suggest that that's kind of how desires work. That's what satisfaction conditions kind of are. I'm not the only one that thinks that this is an important point. Bill Lycan has picked up on this and written about it several times. I won't read the whole Lycan quote, but here's the money section of his passage. The present tense truth of the content proposition is at least necessary for satisfaction. Now, I just want to point out that the present tense truth of the content proposition, that's not entirely clear what that means, but probably the best way to construe it is to say, well, that's just what temporal contents are, right? You evaluate them as true at that moment when you provide the time, and they're true at that time. So what conclusion do we draw from what I'm calling Stamp's insight? Because I think it's a little bit stronger than the other observations that I made. So satisfaction, variability, and the modified Richard argument, they support a kind of standard temporalism for desire contents. Maybe I just picked the right kind of examples to show you. If you thought my examples were plausible, maybe that's fine. But I'm saying that desire temporalism is stronger than that, right? What supports that? I think Stamp's insight supports the stronger claim, right? Here's why. Consider desire's role in the rationalization of action. So now we're back in the territory of Julie's talk from the other day. How do we rationalize an action? Well, we give kind of one of the standard ways of doing it has to do with talking about the beliefs and the desires of agents, right? So an agent, namely me, performs a certain action, putting on Diamond Dogs on the record player because he wants to listen to it, and he believes doing so will cause this state of affairs to obtain, right? Implicit in this rationalizing explanation is the assumption that the status of the desire content changes or can change. There are all of these examples from action theory where people engage in beliefs, or people engage in behaviors, and we start getting these really weird and mysterious interpretations of what they're doing if we can't assume that there's something about this behavior that affects their desires, right? I mean, has to do with, like, Anscombe has examples of people, somebody collecting saucers of mud. Quinn has this example of a guy who just turns on radios obsessively whenever he's around them. In those cases, they have a lot to do with whether or not somebody either sees it as a good action or gets any pleasure from this activity or something like that. But I mean, I think you get the same kind of inability to see somebody's action as a rational action if their behavior can't change the status of the content of their desire, right? It doesn't make sense to do something if your behavior isn't going to change something about the world to change your desire content from unsatisfied to satisfied. Anyway, like I said, I don't mean to I don't want to convince you of this necessarily. Well, I do, but I'm not going to stay with this topic very much longer. I just wanted to point out that maybe you find the examples that I gave compelling, but you're still kind of skeptical about it. You might say, like, all right, well, maybe Stamp's wanting to win the tennis match. Daniel's wanting to listen to Diamond Dogs, and Lenny's believing or wanting Clinton to be president. Maybe these are all decent examples, but could a different set of examples, or maybe the same example set up differently somehow, could they yield a counterexample or something that'll cause us to say that, yeah, desire temporalism is just that's not going to work out? Here's what people will sometimes say to me. They'll say, look, we've got different ways of sticking a time indication into content somehow. Look at the way we talk about desire content, right? In English, complements of desire verbs tend to be infinite, or they are infinitival. So let's assume that they don't have tense. Not everybody thinks that that's what's going on, but whatever. It's a decent enough suspicion. But maybe you can stick in a time indication by means of an adverb, right? And in fact, a lot of temporalists have even said, yeah, well, when you stick in a time indication by means of an adverb, then that's no longer a temporal content, right? They've said this. So Jill wants to have the money by tomorrow. Jill wants to go swimming next week. Joe wants to win the election on election day. Jill wants to attend the concert on July 30th, at 8:30 in the evening, right? You'll notice that all the examples that I gave before didn't have any temporal adverbials. So what's the problem? The problem is that some of these adverbials seem to denote times, plausibly, at least as part of their meanings. I'm abstracting away from an awful lot of internal structure here, sometimes even quantificational structure over what's supposed to be happening at the interval described by the adverbial. So, I don't want to give the impression that I'm doing justice to temporal adverbs here. I'm most clearly not. But the point is really a simple one, is that if times get into, if any of these have times that they're kind of inserting into the logical form of a sentence, and that happens in the reported content, then as far as the attitude report goes, the attitude content is eternal. This is maybe not a direct challenge to desire temporalism, because it's always open to you to say, yeah, well, those are just desire ascriptions. Attitude ascriptions are weird. It's not even clear that they're always super accurate. There's a lot of people in the history of the semantics of attitude ascriptions to just kind of say, well, they don't. Our practice, our linguistic practice of ascribing attitudes doesn't really align precisely with what agents' attitudes or subjects' attitudes actually are. So this is an option that's open, but I don't necessarily want to go that route, right? Because it will make it look like desire temporalism is at odds with linguistic practice in a way that I don't think it is. Before I move on, I just want to say what got me thinking about this more seriously is a review that I got on a paper that I don't know, it's in there somewhere, that I published a few years ago, and it was reviewer 2, the second reviewer. But I don't want to make a joke. Reviewer 2 is actually very good. So this is not my calling them reviewer 2 is not a dig at them. The author holds that desire contents in general lack a time indication, but they fail to give any consideration to the obvious apparent counterexamples, like the ones I mentioned on the last slide. In all these cases, there seems to be a time indication in the desire content. Suppose 5b is true and Jill still wants all the same things in 2 weeks' time. Does it follow that she will want to go swimming the week after that? It seems not. In this case, the desire report pairs with 1 and not with 3. And so this goes back to the modified Richard argument that I was talking about earlier. This further calls into question the probativeness of the author's observation. So I thought, well, let me think about this. I had a response in the paper, and in a footnote, I say, well, examples like 5 pose a problem for desire temporalism insofar as it seems to us that the temporal adjunct specifies a time as part of the desire's content. But here's another possibility. The time indicated by the adjunct isn't actually part of the desire's content. It serves a different role relating the content of the attitude to a time. Instead of contributing to the content, what the temporal adjunct does is circumscribe candidate times at which that content might be satisfied. So I said that you know, paper was accepted, and then I was like, okay, nailed it. And I didn't think about it for a while. But then I started worrying about it a little bit more, and I was like, all right, well, if somebody asks me what does that actually mean, I better have a good answer for them. I think it's fairly clear in the case what it means as far as attitude contents go. But whether or not this maps in any meaningful way into what's happening in language, this is a different question. And so I wanted to think a little bit more about this. Now, there's a suggestion that I wanted to take on from Britt Brogard. In a series of works, she proposes an operator-based account of the interaction between tense and temporal adverbs. And you know, the funny thing is that I had read some of this work, and I remember being like, you know, I don't know about this proposal. And then I made that comment in the paper, and then I realized afterwards that I was like, I'm talking about the thing that Brogard's talking about. I mean, I cited her in that paper, but I should have cited her right there. So let me see how this might work as a kind of solution, right? So she has this a part of her book where she's kind of discussing these examples that Jeff King takes on from this Dowdy paper from 1982, where what's going on is that you've got an adverb and you've got a tense operator, and you're treating them both as operators, right? So a sentence like 6, yesterday John turned off the stove. So let's say we treat the past tense as a tense operator P, and yesterday as just this kind of operator Y, such that Y phi is true just in case phi is true when evaluated at T prime, such that T prime is within the day preceding the day of the time of evaluation. So that's the way it's presented in the King paper from 2003. I won't talk about this in detail, but it's pretty clear what the problem is here. We've got two kind of scope configurations that are possible here. Either Y outscopes the past tense operator, or vice versa. I won't read you the truth conditions here. The problem is that it's not clear that there is any scope ambiguity in 6. This is a really similar observation to what Partee makes in the famous turning off the stove example, which we'll get to soon, but with a temporal adverbial. But worse than that even is that when you calculate the truth conditions, like neither of them get it anywhere right. In both cases, the turning off the stove would be earlier than we just intuitively understand it in 6. So Brogard's idea is to say, well, look, we can still have an operator here, but we've got basic tense operators and these things which kind of modify the basic tense operators. So they kind of compose to form a composite tense operator. So we just have these basic tense operators like P and F from tense logic. And the adverb, you can just treat it as this kind of modifier, but very similar kind of semantics to before. So the suggestion here is that if A is an adverbial modifier, P is the basic past tense operator, and phi is a sentence, then AP phi maps to true if and only if phi is true at a past circumstance of evaluation whose class of times belongs to the class of times picked out by A. Right? This is the this is how Brogard puts it. So with Y as before, but now as a modifier of the tense operator, you get this PY composite tense operator. And lo and behold, it actually gives you pretty good truth conditions. These are just the ones that we would expect this sentence to have. But notice what the adverb is doing here, according to the proposal. It restricts the shifting of the circumstance of evaluation, right? So the past tense just kind of takes you to time in the past. And the Y restricts this candidate time at which this can happen. So this is really along the lines of what was suggested in in that footnote in my paper. So are we all good then? Well, big part of Brogaard's aim is to defend a standard temporalism via an operator view of defense, view of tense, right? But suppose the operator view is wrong. Now I'll say that one of our hosts, David, is one of the people who's done a really fantastic job talking about some of these arguments against the operator view. So I don't want to just dismiss the operator view, but I do want to admit at least that that's not the standard. In semantics, that's not the way people. I mean, Dowdy kind of thought of it like this, and Montague had an operator view, but that's not really the standard view in semantics nowadays. And also in philosophy of language, there are a bunch of philosophers that'll say, well, look to what the semanticists are doing, right? Specifically writing about Recanati's book from 2004, Jason Stanley, in a really long review of that book, he writes, most philosophers of language and even many linguists still accept that modals are operators of some kind, and so worlds are features of circumstances of evaluation. But most linguists hold that tenses are not operators and times are part of semantic content rather than being features of circumstances of evaluation, right? So the idea here is that you don't need to tell me about any kind of temporalism or circumstances of evaluation because the times are in there. They're in the semantic content, right? And so this is often taken by folks like Stanley and by King as settling the issue about favoring eternalism over temporalism across the board, right? And so my aim for the rest of the talk, there's a bit left here still, which is that, well, fine, let's take on the pronominal theory of tense as suggested by Stanley and King. But I want to show that something very much like what Brogaard describes is possible and even necessary within the pronominal theory of tense in certain environments. And I'm going to use this fact to support my own claim and defend the desire temporalism. Now, seeing the list of people in the audience, I don't think I need to say too much about this pronominal view, but I'm going to introduce it with the real simple nuts and bolts version and then kind of go a little bit from there. There's Partey's famous paper noting a number of parallels between pronouns and tenses, namely that they both seem to admit of deictic uses, they have anaphoric uses, and they both admit of these kind of they both engage in binding. So, for example, I didn't turn off the stove. That doesn't really seem. It seems very much like what's going on there as we're talking about a specific time, right? That doesn't seem to be like this existential past, which says that I never turned on the stove in the past. There are these anaphoric uses, just like in 11b, Sheila borrowed my display cable during last conference, and Sam is borrowing it today. The pronoun it is anaphoric on my display cable. And likewise, Sam had a party last Friday, and Sam got drunk. It seems that the tense in the conjunct is anaphoric on the tense in the first conjunct. Seems like we can bind tenses. So just like in 12b, if one of those arrows hits the target, it's mine. The it is bound by the one of those arrows in the antecedent. Similar kind of construction, and whenever Susan comes in, John immediately leaves. All right, so if tenses are like pronouns, we need a theory of pronoun interpretation to kind of tell us a little bit about what's going on here. Well, so we'll just take the textbook one from the Hyman Kratzer textbook. Simple to do this. We just relativize the interpretation function to a variable assignment. We need the variable assignment anyway for interpreting quantifiers. And then we give the denotation to pronouns as follows. There's an index on the pronoun, and we just take the the interpretation function to apply to that index to yield the object, that object, right? The object in the nth object in a sequence, and that's going to be the denotation of he sub n, for example. Past and present, more or less the same thing. There's an index, and the assignment function just gives us the time of the index there. That doesn't get us that far, though, because according to that makes past and present mean more or less the same thing. Doesn't past mean in the past and present mean like now? Well, yes, it does, but we can treat that similarly to the way we would treat pronouns. We can build an anteriority and overlap into the meaning of these as a kind of presupposition. We just make the interpretation function a partial function. So with pronouns, we would say something like he and it is defined only if G of n is masculine, and if it's defined, then it's just as stated before. We essentially do the same thing with past and present. One more thing, we need to have verbs have an argument position for times now, in addition to their thematic arguments. So for cry, for example, we get this. Cry now has the type, this I here. This is the primitive type for times, or intervals rather. And so here, this is a higher order function from a time to a function from entities to a function from worlds to truth values. But interestingly now, verbs now have an argument position for times, right? So you can see, I guess, why Stanley and King would say, the times are in there, right? They're arguments of the verb. So it does look like tenses add times in the semantic composition. And if they do that in the likes of 5, even though there's, not necessarily any tense, but they might be getting time in there some other way, then the adverbals are predicates of these times, then things look bad for my proposal or for Brogaard's. But things are much more complicated than that. People that work on tense don't tend to take this nuts and bolts version and say, well, all done. That's what tense is. There's a lot of really, difficult questions here, and that we saw yesterday in part in Brenda's presentation. In some of these classic papers, there's a lot of motivation by thinking about what's going on in sentences like the following. John met a man who was talking. John believed a man was walking around the office, and John thought that Leslie is pregnant. So these past under past constructions and present under past constructions. Notice that 19 has simultaneous and backshifted readings. Talk about that a little bit more, what those are in a second. 18 can have a reading where the walking and the meeting, this is a remote reading, but it's possible for 18, are both in the past, but the walking is after the meeting. There's a typo here that, this 18 should, that should say 19. Because in 19, there's no analogous reading there. We don't get that reading in 19. And in 20, we get this double access reading, right? And there's a lot of stuff that you can't explain on this nuts and bolts version of the pronominal theory that I just presented. Somehow I'm out of, whatever. Now I'm scrolling. I don't know how that's happening, but that's fine. So there's lots of proposals for how to deal with. These are all the, not all, but a number of the classic papers. I want to focus on this Bush proposal from 97. So what she suggests to deal with this is this is kind of a theory that was in development for a good 8 years and culminated in this 1997 paper. There's two main features of this mature theory. There's a feature transmission mechanism for tense features to percolate up the tree, and then there's an incorporation of the de re semantics from Cresswell and von Stechau into tense system. I'm running out of time, and in any event, I just want to focus on this second thing for our purposes. What's going on here is that Abush really thinks that, well, we can explain a lot of what's going on with tense, at least in English, by adopting this kind of system. Now, Cresswell and von Stechel have a semantics for the de re, and they draw on Lewis 1979, according to which attitudes are not relations between subjects and propositions. They're instead relations between subjects and properties, which are not sets of worlds, but sets of centered worlds, an ordered pair of a world and a center. So belief, they say, is just a set of centered worlds. What this winds up saying is that, well, if you have a belief, they say, then your doxastic alternatives is like a thing, a spatio-temporally located thing. Those are your doxastic alternatives. What you're doing as you become more opinionated about the world is that you're just locating your doxastic center. You're like, oh, well, I'm this kind of thing, right? Belief de dicto, Lewis points out, is, the same. We don't need to change things for de se and de dicto belief. It's just that as far as the doxastic alternatives go for de dicto belief, the choice of center is immaterial, right? So what I'm doing when I'm believing that Paris is the capital of France, I'm just locating myself in a world where Paris is the capital of France, and that's something that all of you can do. The center doesn't. You all occupy different centers, and you can believe this just as well as I can. He also suggests, Lewis, that, well, we can get a kind of de re account out of this, right? Where the de re is just belief de se plus an appropriate acquaintance relation to the object, to the res. And he gets that from Kaplan 68. Now, this is kind of complicated to make this work in the semantics because you get truth conditions that are kind of like this in 21. A subject X believes at T and W that Y is F relative to an acquaintance relation R if X bears R uniquely to Y at T and W, and X believes de se at T and W that the thing to which he bears R is F, right? So how do you get, the question is, how do you get truth conditions like 21 from grammatical construction like 22, construed de re, right? 22, this is just the sentence from Quine. Ralph believed that Ortcut was a spy. They suggest you get it like this. Believe, a verb like believe, takes two arguments. Actually, it's one argument, but as an ordered pair. A property argument, just a set of centered worlds, and a res argument. So the schema for this, for a sentence like S believes alpha is P, where that's a de re belief, is something like this. Believe S, and then this ordered pair of alpha and this property P, right? We'll come back to the schematization.
Daniel, you have 5 minutes left.
5 minutes? Great. I think I can do it. Now, we can generalize this structure and this schema in 23. And I want to pause over this, kind of subsection of a tree here, because if you look, this node here, the VP, believe S, has the same type as cry that we saw earlier, right? And the verb believe takes a, this here is a centered worlds proposition. And it outputs the same kind of, something with the same semantic type as just a regular verb like cry. But if you look at the sister of the verb, this S node here, you got this weird thing here, which, A dot AST, where A is not really even a type. It's a variable ranging over types, right? So how do we get from whatever this is to a centered worlds proposition, right? Well, like this, right? So this dot notation here, this is just the thing that I showed you before. It's kind of what they call a structured proposition. The S node is just, if we're taking Ralph believed Ortgut to be a spy, it's just Ortgut and the property of being a spy. Now the res R is Ortgut, right? But when we say Ortgut, this is just us, the ascribers, talking about Ortgut. We know who Ortgut is. Ralph might not even know the guy's name. He's just acquainted with this guy in some way. Remember, this is a de re belief. So when we compose this, it's not the normal semantic value of Ortgut that enters the composition, but actually R, which is the acquaintance relation, right? And it could be something like the guy I saw sneaking around the dock. So now you have two sets, right? Because the acquaintance relation describes a set, and this thing describes a set. So you have two sets. You stick a definite operator in front of it, and you get something like this, right? Which basically says the thing that I am acquainted with through the thing, or the guy that I saw sneaking around the dock, is a spy. W. That's the centered world proposition that can compose with belief, right? So that's how you get the 22, the truth conditions to 22 from 21. Now that's the de re. Bush says, look, just do this not with items of type E, but also items of type I. So with times. Otherwise, as far as the composition go, things are the same. I think the syntax is not quite the same, but I'm a philosopher, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. Consider a past under past sentence like 24. Mary believed it was raining. We can get a simultaneous reading with a logical form like this in 25. The lower past is co-indexed to the higher past, and the sister of the verb is this thing, this ordered pair of past and this property of times that it's raining. R is just the relation of identity, the local now of the attitude. And so we get a way to describe that. We can get the backshifted reading in a much similar time, or a much similar way, just with a different time. Not going to talk about how to rule out the readings that we don't get, because that's where the feature transmission system comes in, and this upper limit constraint. Don't need to worry about it. I'm also not going to talk about the double access readings. But what's important for us is this schematization of the belief de re. Right? Oops. There you go. Now, when this is a time, what this actually does is it provides the evaluation time of the temporal content of the attitude. This does the work of the circumstance of evaluation as far as things are concerned from the within this pronominal view. Now, if we stick in a temporal adverbial, and glossing over a lot here because just sticking in a temporal adverbial turns out to be really, really hard, as von Stechow puts it in not just this 1995 paper, but in several papers. But let's just assume that it's something kind of like this, where the adverbial can be co-indexed with the time, right? That would mean that this is the temporal res, and this is the content that's being ascribed of the temporal res. Right? Now, the main point here is that we get something with something like the temporal de re. We don't need composite temporal tense operators to tell the adverbs as circumstance modifier story, right? We kind of get it from this this structure, which is apparently the sister of believe as far as this framework is concerned. Now, back to desire temporalism. I'm going to stop pretty much right here. This gives us an important proof of concept for the adverbs as circumstance shifters defense of desire temporalism. I'll just leave this up here. I won't say too much about it because once I've set up the other stuff there, I think this is more or less the thing that we can say, right? This is why it's I don't think that we need to say that the times in the temporal adverbials are part of the desire content. If anything along the lines of this view is it all right, this gives us a perfectly good way of telling this circumstance shifting story, but within the pronominal theory, right? And it bypasses the operator debate entirely. Now, so the general lessons that I want to give is that desire temporalism remains compelling, as far as I'm concerned. But far from sitting uncomfortably with the expression of time in natural language, language finds a way to express this kind of temporalism, right? When we start talking about attitudes, and it'll do this even if you think semantic content is ultimately eternal, right? Because these are all embedded contents. Even if you think the output of a matrix sentence in a context is an eternal proposition, there's still a way to do this as far as the semantics is concerned. So I think there's a coherent way to make sense of my spiel from my 2021 footnote in Popular Theories of Semantics of Tense. And when it comes to temporal attitude content, opting for pronouns or object language quantification doesn't settle the issue. So I'll stop right there because I think I'm over. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Okay, it's time for the Q&A. Please raise your hands. Peter.
Thanks, Dan. As you can guess, I'm a fan of this talk too. You're talking about two of my favorite things in verbs of desire and temporalism. I first want to make sure I understand the central thesis here. So do I understand correctly that the view you're defending is that with verbs of desire, that you have to, the satisfaction for those desires has to be understood egocentrically, as it were, so that when you talk about temporalism, you mean temporalism in the sense of like in my egocentric future or something like that, or my egocentric present or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So I think I actually, so here's how do I answer this simply? I think I don't want to say that, but I think I want to use Lewis, this Lewis story, the way Cresswell and von Stecher use it, which ultimately think is not very much like what Lewis intended. What I actually think is that what language does is it makes available you can make available these temporal contents, and then you have this this can describe a circumstance of evaluation, and then evaluate the content relative to this circumstance of evaluation. So I don't think it has to always be egocentric. In the following, basically for the following reason, I think I can have desires that are not egocentric. There are these papers that people have complained about selfless desires, right? So I can desire that I have a desire that my children, live a long and happy life long after I'm dead, right? There's a sense in which, like, okay, well, if that's going to come, if that is ever kind of satisfied from a semantic standpoint, I'm not going to be there, to provide the center to according to which to evaluate that. I mean, there's
right, but the issue is not whether all desires are of that character, whether some desires must be of that character, though, right? So, so then, if it's not, maybe you don't want to put it in terms of egocentric position, but then I have a little trouble understanding the difference between temporal and eternal then. So then what does that difference come to?
So let me let me describe another thing which I think is going to would be a consequence of if you were to adopt this kind of ego-centric position, right? So if I want something, let's say I want, I don't know, phi. I think it's possible to kind of want phi, but not really want it now, right? If it's always from this egocentric position, right? Because the egocentric, the doxastic center, or the center is always going to have like this temporal component too. It's going to be the local now, right?
Yeah.
But if I want phi, then it's entirely possible that I just want it to happen at some point, right, in the future. I don't need it to be now.
Right. So there are such cases. But are there cases where the satisfaction of the desire has to be understood? See, I mean, you're defending temporalism, and I'm just trying to understand what it is you're defending.
Mm-hmm.
If not an understanding of desires that are that must be egocentric. That's not to say that all of them are. It's to say that, well, if you're a temporalist about desire, then you must believe that there are kinds of desires from which that egocentric or temporal content cannot be eliminated.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. In fact, I think the rationalizing, when we talk about rationalizing explanations, I think that that kind of egocentric perspective comes into play there.
All right, final question then. So then what's the difference with belief, for example? So I believe the meeting is soon.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that not equally kind of temporal, in that I've situated the satisfaction of the belief in my kind of near future?
So I think belief is different. I mean, so what I take myself to be doing with this advancing this desire temporalism thing is to be pretty much non-committal about beliefs. And part of the reason is that I think that at least some of the examples that you are given to say that beliefs can have temporal content don't seem nearly very compelling to me. Some of them are much better. I mean, some of the prior examples are quite good, and this one might be fine. But I think that it's at least the case that we can quibble about them in a way that's coherent, whereas it seems a lot less coherent for desires. If that
okay, thank you.
Okay, Andres.
Yes, thank you. Super minor point because I'm not an expert on this,
Mm-hmm.
but I like tense theory. So I didn't get exactly how you derive the backshift reading in the I believe it was raining.
Okay. Let me go over here.
You just assign two different indexes.
Mm-hmm.
How you get I mean, why you cannot have something like a posterior reading? How you get the ordering of tenses there?
Yeah, so that's something that you don't get alone from.
You need some extra pragmatic work, right, or something.
No, you get this. What you need is this upper limit constraint, which over the course of developing the theory, Bush actually changes what the upper limit constraint is. Early on, she says something which sounds plausible, but she winds up deciding against it, which is that like you're not going to get the right kind of acquaintance relation to a time that's after the local now of the belief. But then there's some evidence that suggests that like that can't be right. So she develops this feature transmission system where essentially what's happening is that you can't have a certain basically it rules out this kind of configuration where the this embedded past comes later than the higher past in these kind of constructions. So I mean, I haven't talked about that much because it's, you know, I feel like it's not something that's necessary to make the argument that I want to. But that's how she winds up doing it. I mean, it's also one of the more controversial aspects of the theory, as far as I understand it, because, you know, it seems could be a little bit ad hoc. But yeah, that's how you would rule that out.
Okay, thank you.
As far the double access readings for her, though, that there's something much more pragmatics-y about that, right? You just have a number of different possible interpretations based on the kinds of LFs that are available, and then you know some of them they just get ruled out. But it's kind of in the pragmatics, but it's also more complicated too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Yuli.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I don't know if we still have some time for a question/comment. I have two kind of questions, comments. One concerning beliefs, and I think that comes from Elizabeth Ascomber's work, and then John Schwenkler, who was kind of on the first day on my talk, he's kind of using this idea that beliefs are common in two different varieties. One is rationalizing beliefs that can be used for, or practical beliefs that can be used for rational thinking or rationalizing. And those seem to be, as what you would probably call temporal. And then beliefs, kind of prediction things. Ascomber's example is, I'm going to fail the exam. And then you can ask, well, you're not so bad in the subject. That would be a predictive belief. And then the person might object to you saying that, no, I mean that I'm going to intentionally do something to fail it. How that would be a rationalizing belief. And the second seem to be patterning with want. But it's just a comment on your hedging on whether beliefs are one way or the other. Maybe they are both.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm happy to if they would both turn out. I mean, that way. The reason that I'm hedging a little bit is because what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't really matter what you think about beliefs. Desires kind of have to be this way, but you know, maybe it does kind of matter what you think about beliefs as well.
And the second point is I was trying to make kind of the intuition, the difference that you the difference between eternal beliefs and temporal desires clear to myself, and I thought that using second-order beliefs and second-order desires helps.
Okay.
In the sense that I believe that I believe P, the second belief extends to the time of the first belief, or the first order belief extends to the time of the second order belief.
Okay.
There is I want P does not. Like there is I don't know if you agree or not, but there is a clear kind of one ends, the second starts thing.
That's interesting. What can you say again with the interpretation for the desire case there, the second order desire?
It's our usual KK. I believe that I believe.
Yeah.
KK principle. Yeah. I believe that I believe P, and the interpretation is that your first order belief, like the low one, overlaps with the time of your second order belief, the high one. Yeah. It should. There is a clear kind of, you're stepping over the border. The first order desire begins after the second, the higher order desire, the second order desire is satisfied.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Maybe that's a clear kind of intuition for me, but I'm not sure if people share it.
Yeah, I'll have to think of some more about that. I mean, do you think that this does this kind of how does this how would that jive with the thoughts about temporalism in either case? Do you think?
That's because desires are temporal.
Yeah.
That's why you cannot extend the second to the. You cannot overlap them.
Interesting.
There is KK showed that the second order beliefs should overlap. Otherwise, it's a different thing.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and there is some. I have to think about this some more, especially because there's some. I mean, wanting to want is actually like it winds up being important in some stuff in action theory.
Yes, there are. Yeah, that's why I thought about it, because there is a lot of discussion there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some of these Frankfurt.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is All right, I'll think some more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Okay, I'm afraid that we have to stop now. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you everyone for staying until this time. We will resume in 40 minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.